The origin of life on our planet and possibly elsewhere is one of the biggest remaining mysteries in science. But the origin of life is so yesterday. Today, I have a new paper from scientists who claim that life had two origins. And I want to explain why I'm optimistic that we'll indeed figure out how life began eventually. This new study comes from a group of researchers in Germany. They find that life had two origins in the sense that two of the predecessors of today's complex life had to develop the ability to independently reproduce. They start from the hypothesis that the common ancestor of all forms of life depended on minerals in hot seafloor vents to survive. This is currently the most widely accepted theory for the origin of life on Earth. The new thing is now that they say this ancestor then branched into two types of microbial life, bacteria and archaea, each of which was still dependent on the vent's minerals. And each group then separately evolved the ability to live independently without the vent's minerals. Much later, a descendant of the archaea absorbed the bacterium, which became the energy-producing part of complex cells that eventually gave rise to plants, animals, and YouTubers. So this is why they say life had two origins, because these two microorganisms both had to figure out how to survive away from the vent. It's the development of an entirely self-sufficient metabolism that they call the origin of life. The researchers say they inferred this by comparing proteins from almost 1,000 modern microorganisms. I give this a 7 out of 10 on the bullshit meter because while this is an interesting study, it can't rule out the possibility that the self-sufficiency genes had a common origin, but then they mutated later in one of the branches. Basically, more work is needed. Will we ever solve this problem? Will we ever be able to say, these were the ingredients, these were the chemical reactions, the mutations that led to life? Or has it been too long ago and the evidence will forever remain vague? The origin of life is one of the topics that John Horgan discusses in his book, The End of Science. He argues that it'll remain impossible to tell different hypotheses apart. I think he's wrong. But first, a word from our sponsor. I know you normally skip the ad, but I think this one's worth your time. This video was sponsored by FarmKind, a non-profit organization for animal welfare. For every person on the planet, there are about 13 farmed animals, and most of them live in horrific conditions. And the worst thing is that most of their suffering is unnecessary. Only 3% of animal donations go to farmed animals, and FarmKind exists to fix this. They work with experts to select the top charities that are saving animals from cruelty, getting hens out of cages, getting mother pigs out of crates so they can look after their piglets, and pushing the food system away from factory farming altogether. FarmKind takes no cut. 100% of your donation goes to the charities, and you'll see how many animals your gift will help. Even tiny donations change real lives. 50 cents a day, 15 euros a month saves around 350 animals a year from suffering. And if you use my code, then your monthly donation gets a 50% boost. Links in the description. And now back to the episode. I think Horgan's wrong. I think the situation with the origin of life studies today is similar to cosmology 40 years ago, the area that studies the origin of the universe. This used to be almost entirely speculation, but since then observations have become dramatically better, from the cosmic microwave background to galaxy surveys to precise spectral measurements. And it's not just the data. Scientists also now understand much better how to extract information from the data. The result of this has not been that one day to the next we had a theory for the origin of the universe that everyone agreed on, but the details have become increasingly clear. And I think it'll be similar for the origin of life. Data will become better and hypotheses will be narrowed down. And partly I think that Horgan's wrong because the research on the origin of life is no longer just trying to reconstruct the past from fossils. Scientists have for a long time tried to reproduce the necessary chemical processes in the laboratory, and increasingly they're successful. For example, earlier this year, researchers in Cambridge reported that they found a small piece of RNA that could undergo the chemical reactions necessary for reproducing itself. Now, this molecule did not actually reproduce itself. It still needed some coaxing to get the chemistry to work out. But it's a big step forward and makes the RNA origin of life much more plausible. And scientists are trying something even more ambitious. The European Research Council is spending almost 13 million euros on a project called Mini Life, which will run until 2030. The researchers in the project want to start from elementary chemicals to create a system that maintains itself, has a boundary, reproduces, passes on information, and evolves through natural selection. It might not work, and even success would not prove that life on Earth began in the same way, but it'd demonstrate at least one complete route from chemistry to evolution, mini-life. I think they should have called it Frankencell. In any case, the origin of life has a big advantage over the origin of the universe.